Muy buenos días, muy buenas tardes, muy buenas noches. Este es Luis Alberto Jovel desde Australia junto con Vero desde Buenos Aires y traemos en esta ocasión desde Chicago a John Walton. So let me welcome you, John, Dr. John Walton, and then I'll call you John as as you directed to this interview for our audiences. And let me start by asking something about you, your life, and if you can tell us about your life and academic and work background that you've done through all the years, which is a lot, but I just like to hear it from you.
Sure. So I was raised in a Christian home in Philadelphia in the United States and grew up loving the Old Testament. Can't really explain all of why that's the case, but I did. And uh, when I went to college, I hadn't figured out that there were people who teach Old Testament. So I didn't know what I could do with Old Testament. So I majored in economics. But then I finally figured out that there are some people out there who teach Old Testament. And so then I did my master's degree in Old Testament at Wheaton College, and then my PhD at Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, which is a Jewish school, and got my PhD there. I did my dissertation on the Tower of Babel
Mhm.
and did a lot of work with sort of comparing the Tower of Babel story with what we find in the ancient Near East. So I got started on comparative studies at that level. My first teaching job was at Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. I taught there for 20 years and enjoyed teaching Old Testament at a variety of levels there. Then in 2001, I moved over to Wheaton College, and there I was teaching in the master's program for biblical exegesis. And I taught 22 years at Wheaton, and just 2.5 years ago, I retired. You can see from the background, I still have my office. And
Yes.
so I still come in every day and do reading and writing, but I'm not teaching courses anymore. I do a lot of travel speaking and get to talk to all kinds of audiences about the sorts of things that I find interesting about the Old Testament and especially its relationship to the ancient Near East. Uh, I've done writing throughout my career. I see writing as a way to extend the classroom, extend the walls of
Mm.
the classroom. So I try things out in the classroom, and when they seem to work and it helps people, then I figure, well, I might as well try to write that down so more people can hear about it. So that's sort of what I've been up to, and trying to understand a lot about how the ancient world context can help us understand the Hebrew Bible better.
Yes, it comes off in your books like the when you talk about Genesis, you talk about how do you call this book? 'Cause I have it somewhere in Spanish. The
The
unknown
last
world
word?
of the last
Lost
world, the
World.
lost,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
of Genesis,
Mundo Perdido. Yeah. Mhm.
yes, and all that. So because you, as you said in your dissertation, you compare the other ancient views regarding a particular event, like in the Tower of Babel, because a
Mhm.
lot of Christians we grow up thinking, oh, this only has to do with the Bible. That's all happens there. And no, it has like the flood and creation. They all have parallel ancient Near Eastern stories, and that has helped a lot of us in Latin America. Well, I live in Australia, but it also has caused a lot of consternation in Latin America because a lot of my fellow Latin Americans have grown up thinking these stories only belong to the Bible and nowhere else.
Mhm.
And this is and I know that in English speaking world also that's a very confronting reality. Uh, and I wonder if you had any flack or any rejection of what you say sometimes.
A lot. I
Okay.
mean, there are people who don't like what I say, who don't accept what I say, and that's fine. They're welcome to their opinions and assessments on it. I'm
Mm,
okay with that. Um, I'm putting information out that has helped me, and that I hope some other people will find helpful, and lots of people do. But there are
mm,
others who don't, and that's all right. You
okay.
know, I don't need to
I
persuade everybody. I just need to do my job
yes.
at putting out information.
Yes, I come to your position. I just need to pass along what like Dr. Walton does. They don't take it. I always say, don't take it out with me. They take it out to him. Write him a letter or write him something. So I pass on the issues. I don't know, Vero, if you want to say something.
You work with biologos?
Yes, biologos.
Mm.
Hmm. And that's a different kind of network, a different kind of conversation. That's the science and faith conversation. And I've been involved in that one for a long time as well. It's a very different network from the ancient Near Eastern studies, people that do that work. So, excuse me. So there are basically three networks that I'm deeply involved in: the science and faith conversation, the ancient Near East conversation, and Old Testament interpretation, exegesis, Hebrew, that conversation.
Oh, right.
And I kind of bring all those three worlds together in my research. Yeah.
All right.
You know, you mentioned how people kind of resist this idea that this literature is outside the Bible. I mean, there are things like it outside the Bible. And that's true. It's true. There are some. And of course, it's important to think about similarities and differences because there are both. But I think it's more important to recognize that that Israel existed in an ancient world, and therefore they thought like people around them. They were familiar with the literature of the peoples around them. Whether they accepted it or didn't, or liked it or didn't, or were same or different, they knew that literature. Just like we live in a world and we know the literature of our world in part, and we interact with that literature. And that's the important part here, because the Hebrew Bible, the Israelite authors, are writing to an audience who is in a world of literature and ideas. And the more we can understand that literature and those ideas, the more we can see the context in which they're having these discussions. I mean, if you're going to study anybody, if you're going to study Augustine, you need to understand the theological tensions that were in his day. Who is he addressing? You know, he's addressing Pelagius, he's addressing Arius, he's in that conversation, and what he writes is attuned to that. And then you move 1,000 years up, and Luther and Calvin are in this conversation, and different issues are on the table, and they're having those conversations. You know, Paul lived in a world where there was the Jewish literature of his day, the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, Philo, the Stoics, Seneca, Plato, Aristotle, and Paul knows that world, and he's interacting with that world. So when we read literature, we need to know the world of conversation that's happening around them, because they are engaging in that conversation. And so it goes way beyond the question of, do we have a similar account in Babylon or in Egypt? We're talking about a cultural context. One of the ways that I like to describe that is that we all wear backpacks, so cultural backpacks. So I have a backpack, my own little backpack, that's going to say creation on it. So what's in my backpack that says creation? You know, I open it up and pull things out, and there's a lot of science in there, right? And there are all kinds of ideas that are the ideas of our world, some of which I would agree with, some that I wouldn't, but it's all in the backpack. And that's my creation backpack. And our culture has those kinds of backpacks. Well, Israel also has a backpack that says creation. But if you open up their backpack, it doesn't have any of the same things in it that our modern backpacks have. And so when I read about creation in an Israelite text, I want to understand what's in their backpack, because that reflects all of the assumptions that they're bringing, all of the focus that they would have. And so really, and whether it's creation or whether it's law or whether it's history or whether it's identity or marriage or all the different things that it could be, I want to understand what's in their backpack. And that's what this comparative study is all about. Because when I read the literature of the ancient Near East, I'm examining the backpack. I'm seeing the things that are in the backpacks. And maybe the things in a Babylonian backpack are not things that an Israelite would accept but they know what's in a Babylonian backpack, and that's the world of conversation. So,
And,
in one
yeah.
sense, when we talk about the cultural backgrounds and the cultural background study Bible, we're examining backpacks.
Of course.
Mhm. And I just like to, now that you mentioned, this is the Bible we're talking about. This is the book. Maybe Vero can show her now. Shares Biblia de Estudio, Transfondo Cultural, the Bible study background. This is why we are interviewing Dr. Walton. So this is a lot of background. It's very big, actually. This is the tallest Bible I have. It's the tallest one. I mean, it's
Yes,
even
it's
taller
huge.
than it's taller than other books.
And
Let me
it's scary.
see. A History of Apologetics. That's a very tall book. The Myth of Pelagius. That's a very tall book, but this is taller. So it's nice. And as I showed you before, your picture is right away in. It's quite. Let me see if I find it now. Your picture, yours and Craig's
Yeah,
picture
we
is.
try to hide it.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Now I
No.
cannot find it. Now,
Yes,
last time I show it,
I know.
I show it, but now I can't find it.
I know when it.
That's right.
So while I find it or Beto finds it, I want to ask you. I want to ask you something. I want to just want to comment before going to the first question. But you mentioned in Spanish, there's the Latin American. There you go. See, that's a handsome picture. In Spanish, there's always people who ex-evangelicals, like we have in English, ex Christians, that they said, "Oh, the Bible copy everything from the ancient Near Eastern sources." And like you said, if you're living in the society, there's nothing you're copying. You're living within that worldview. And I always say to them, your method of interpreting even historical books or historical data is wrong, because all these people belong to the same culture, Middle Eastern culture. It's like I have grown up in Anglo culture, being in the United States and now in Australia. And sometimes when I hear Beto say some things, I don't really recollect, because I'm not in Latin America. I haven't been there for 43 years. So sometimes she says some things and I don't get it, and she has to explain to me
Yes,
what she means.
it happens.
Yeah, what you mean. So, and same likewise, when she asks me something that she sees in the English-speaking world, she has to ask me, "What do you mean?" And she's learning more English and says, "What do you mean when you say this or that?" Like motto. N.T. Wright says that word a lot. Everything's being motto, and a lot of people, even people living in the United States, Latinos, wouldn't understand that word because it's something that we don't use in Spanish. So it's the same issue, I guess. In English-speaking world, because I've seen it, that the Bible copies everything from the Eastern mythology. Or I
But of
want
course,
to hear what you have to say about that.
sure,
No,
it's not an issue of
no,
copying
Robert.
or borrowing. It's
Mm,
an issue of being in conversation.
mm,
Okay, so the Babylonians have a flood story.
mm,
The Israelites didn't copy their flood story. They have their own flood story
mm,
that has a different interpretation of the flood. What's important is not, oh, there was a flood. Oh, the Israelites must have borrowed this idea that there was a flood. No, everybody knows there was a flood, but the Israelites, the Genesis account, is giving a different interpretation of that
mm,
event, and it's the interpretation that counts. So this
mm,
isn't a question of borrowing; it's a question of being in conversation. Sometimes it's a question of subverting. They subvert the Babylonian view or the Egyptian view. So there's relationship, but that's just because they're all in the same world.
Mhm.
The contrast that I like to use is that the people you're talking about talk about the Bible as being indebted
mm,
to pieces of literature
I
from
like
the
the word
ancient world.
indebted.
I
Yeah.
would rather talk about the Bible being embedded, not
Mm.
indebted, but embedded in the ancient world. That probably won't work in Spanish to have those sounds similar, but at any rate, that's
Maybe that's maybe
No, no,
that's
no,
I can
that
try
sounds
it.
good.
I can try it.
Actually,
yeah, that's an important contrast. So
Mm,
I'm not interested in indebtedness. That just is talking about literary similarities and differences, but it's not copying. They're embedded in that world, and that's why we need to understand that world.
That will be endeudado y encrustado. Encrustado. That will be the translation. Está encrustado. Or maybe Vero has a better word. One thing I like to say, something that can be interpreted from two different points of view. And I'm going to take this example. Vero may not like it. Is the Falkland War. Let's say an example. Something that Vero will understand. See, she didn't like it. From the English will be seen as liberation. From the Argentina will be as another country taking their land off. But the important thing is that it happened. That happened. That conflict in 1982. If I'm not. When was that? When was that? You may remember that. Or the late 70s. It happened. So just in both countries were involved, but both countries took a different spin.
They interpret it differently.
They interpret it differently. So something that Latinos would be able to understand. Well, I want to go into the first questions then. The first two questions are primarily mine, and then the rest are mainly Vero's, and then number 6 is it's a mixture.
Actually, I have another one, but not gonna work because we have 1 hour. But start.
Yeah, we hope if we can fit in number 6. But when and how did the idea of writing or incorporating your work into a study Bible format came about?
So it was a long process, really from when I began doing reference works on backgrounds. It was in my mind. The first one I did was the IVP, Bible Background Commentary. I did the Old Testament. Craig Keener did a volume for the New Testament. And that was just going through the whole Bible, verse by verse, passage by passage, and talking about the backgrounds. Even as I was writing that, and that came out in 2000, when I was writing that, I was saying, boy, this would really work good if we could put it in a study Bible. And then I was working on a 5-volume project with Zondervan called the Zondervan Illustrated Bible Backgrounds Commentary.
Yes.
And again, much more extensive, a lot of pictures, a lot of footnotes. I don't know if you're familiar with that work or not.
Yes, I have the New Testament, so I have to get the Old Testament too now.
Yeah. So it's...
Yes.
Right. And, again, this has all the pictures and things of that sort. So, so this is just volume 1 out of 5 volumes. And so likewise, when I was doing that, I was thinking, boy, this would really be great to put this in a study Bible, to have this available through that. So I was thinking about it all along. I approached Zondervan about it, I think a couple times. And we'll think about it. No, maybe that'll work, and things of that sort. But again, it wasn't until about 2014, 2015 that they finally said, we're ready to do this. So that's, I really have had that idea all along to do a study Bible. It's just, I had to get the publisher online to agree that it was a good project to do.
Oh, well, it took quite a while, 14 years, 15 years to convince them or for them to see the opportunity, I guess. And so what was the process behind bringing this project to completion? Because it's a big one, as you have shown, it's a 4-volume Old Testament, and how to fit most of it here, or just a condensed part.
So what we did, and this was, of course, I had 2 different publishers. IVP had the 1 volume, and Zondervan had the 5 volume. And so I worked with both of them. And IVP, since this was a Zondervan project, IVP agreed for me to work this way. What we did was we went through all of the material in both the IVP product and the 5 volume, and got selective. We chose what we thought would be most important, that we could condense down. So really the study Bible is an abridged version of what you find in those other 2 works. And so that was the start of that process, to go through those two works and select the things that would be most appropriate for a study Bible, and trim down some of the academic language that would
Mm.
make it more suitable for a study Bible. But then I also went through all of that and looked at, okay, what are some things that we haven't covered perhaps, or where I've got some new ideas that we want to include. And so I did a good deal of new writing to put into the study Bible. So in that sense, the study Bible is sort of an aggregate of the
Mhm.
IVP product and the Zondervan product and some of my new writing that I was doing. So
Oh.
that was the process. And I had an assistant editor who did the initial um, uh, process of breaking down which things to do, but then I read through all of that to make sure that I agreed.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went in that direction.
But so it was very, since one is it's actually 5 volumes then, because there's a 4 volume from Sondervan and one from IBP. So it was I guess it was a big work on your behalf.
It's 5 from Zondervan
Yeah.
and 1 from IVP.
So six,
Right.
six.
Yeah. Yeah.
So trying to condense all of that took you
Right.
very long time, I guess.
Yeah. It took a year or two.
Oh, wow. So it's a labor of love and well, a lot of it. So the next question is from Vero. I don't know if you want to make it, Vero.
Yes, I want to start with the other question, the question number 4, and then the question number 3, because
Okay, yes.
I think it's better.
Ora. Mhm.
It's about Genesis 1, and it's about considering the cultural and literary context. And well, I want to ask you about the days as we understand them today. Also, if you could mention something about the functional or material. Well, there's a lot to ask here, but about the word vara, for example, about the serpent, there's a lot you can say here. But also about the tempo and the word.
She's
Yes.
she's sounding like those reporters from the White House, John. That they ask one question, but they ask like 3 or 4 in one go.
And each question,
Well, I like that. So I have
and each question I've written a whole book on. So how do I give a brief answer? It's the problem.
Okay. I guess we can start from the
make a few
24 hours.
comments that maybe will help out your readers. Let's go back to the backpacks for a minute. So in our backpack, when we think about creation, we think about material things. We think about God making objects, whether it's the planets and the sun and moon and stars, or whether it's birds and fish, or whether it's mountains and rivers. And, we think of God making stuff. And so we have a very material perspective in our backpacks. But that's not the only way you can think about creation. There are various aspects of creation, and God's done all of them. There's no question God created the material world. God made stuff. Okay, but that might not be the story that is most important in their backpack. So I want to know what's in their backpack. And when you look at the first day, for instance, God creates light, but really God creates day and night. That's what he names, day and night. And so light helps create day and night. Well, day and night is not an object. It's not a thing. And there's no thing being made on day one. And so that leads you to ask the question, what kind of creation account is this supposed to be? Okay. And so that becomes the key question, because that now starts digging into their backpack. What is the creation story the way they want to tell it? And it may not have to do with material stuff. And so I came to the conclusion that they're more interested in God bringing order. And I call it a functional approach. I like the word order better these days, that God's bringing order, but He brings order by making things work the way they're supposed to. So role and purpose in an ordered system. And so I spend a lot of time in my books talking about why we should think about Genesis 1 in that way. That it's really not about stuff, objects. And so God creates time, God creates space in which we can live, and God creates the whole process by which food grows. So God sets up functions. Even day 4, the 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 great lights for signs and seasons and days and years. That's all ordering our world. And it makes a lot of sense when you get to day 6, because when God creates people, humanity, in his image, he makes them to work alongside him as order bringers. If you don't understand the 6 days as order bringing, you don't understand the image of God as order bringer. After all, if you think of creation as object making, God didn't make people in his image to be object makers. Okay? We're order bringers, subdue and rule. And so this pulls the account together. It explains what we've got. So there's a lot of explanatory power in that. Now, once we do that, we will make that shift to their backpack and think about order instead of material objects and understand the image of God. Now the 24 hours can make a little more sense. The 24-hour days. Yes, he's talking about 24-hour days, but lots of people have tried to take those 24-hour days and turn them into a history of objects, right? The age of the earth. How old is the earth? See, they're still thinking that it's an account that deals with objects, making stuff. If the 24-hour days are not about making objects and the history of the material universe, but is about God ordering the world, then it has nothing to say about the age of the earth, because that's a material question. We're dealing with order. So what does 7 days have to do with ordering? And that's where I turn to day 7 and to the idea that when God rests, in the ancient world, everybody knows when God's rest, they rest in temples. And when God rests, he doesn't rest in a bed, he rests on a throne. And God's rest is God's rule. And therefore, we have the idea that he brought order and then sits down on his throne to rule over the creation that he has ordered. And it all comes together. It makes sense. So those days are not so much about the age of the material universe. They rather serve a rhetorical function, because God sitting on his throne and resting is temple imagery, because that's where God sits on his throne and rests, in a temple. That's temple imagery. And temples, sacred space, was inaugurated in 7-day slots. So 7 days is an appropriate way to talk about this inauguration of sacred space, God dwelling among the people that he created. 7 is also a number of transition in the ancient world. 7 days is a period of transition. So it makes sense that they would frame it rhetorically in a 7-day structure. So that's a quick summation of the Genesis 1.
It's
But
okay.
you
I
wanted to
had
know about the serpent as well. I don't know why.
yes,
It's in
yes,
chapter
of
1.
course. And I had a problem with the plants because we have a problem that in Genesis too.
Well, the serpent, I believe in the Old Testament, in the context of Genesis, they would have seen the serpent as a chaos creature. Chaos creature is a category in the ancient world. We have it in the Bible. We have Leviathan, who's a chaos creature. Others are mentioned, Isaiah 27, the last chapters of Job. Chaos creatures are kind of a known category. They're creatures that occupy the realm of non-order. Non-order is that area outside of ordered space. So in the ancient world, they believed that something did not exist until it had a role and a function and a purpose in an ordered system. So the Egyptians talk about the sea as non-existent and the desert as non-existent. They are material, but that's not their criterion. In their backpack, existence means part of the ordered world. Existence in our backpack means material. Different backpacks. So ordering is, again, bringing something into the ordered world. That's creation. That brings it into existence. So chaos creatures are on the periphery. They belong to the non-ordered world. Yet the serpent is one of the creatures that God made. So chaos creatures kind of bridge the ordered world and the non-ordered world, but they typically function in non-ordered ways. That means the serpent is not inherently evil. Non-order is not evil. It's a default. It's kind of what things normally are until they are ordered. And if order is not maintained, it falls into non-order. Like the laundry and the dirty dishes and things like that. You've got to keep up with order, else things get pretty
Yes.
messy pretty quick. So order has to be maintained. Non-order is the default. But then there's also a third category: non-order, order. There's disorder. Disorder is when someone is disrupting the order of someone else. Okay? The serpent is not disorder, the serpent is non-order. Okay? Disorder comes from people who mess up other people's order because we want to do it ourselves. We want order to be around us instead of around God. That's what chapter 3 is all about. The fruit from the tree is order, knowledge of good and evil. Good and evil are order terms, not moral terms. And so they want to be able to determine order for themselves, autonomously, by themselves, with themselves in the center. That's all of us. This is the history of us. Okay? All we like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way. There's the definition of it. Every inclination of the heart was only evil all the time. We always wanted to do it our way. And that's the history of humanity. And so the serpent is simply a catalyst here, an agent of non-order, making suggestive comments. He never tells them, eat the fruit. He never tells them, disobey God. He just says, oh, what about, he's an agent of non-order. That's how the Israelites would have understood the serpent. They never referred to that serpent again in all of the rest of the Old Testament. Chapter 3 is not a big deal in the rest of the Old Testament. The prophets never go back to it. It doesn't function the same way as it tends to do in our Christian theology.
It's very interesting what you say right now, because I hear some president of a Southern Baptist seminary in his podcast is always referring to in a post chapter 3 Genesis word. He's always going back to it, and you saying that none of the prophets go back to it. It's a worldview that he has, that he's trying to, or this. It's also a political position, I guess. They try to ingrain in our brains. I listen to him because I like listening to what he says from his point of view of the news. I don't buy it, but he's always saying this particular saying in a post Genesis 3 world. In a post Genesis 3 world, I mean, yes, it's what you said right now. I mean, it has always sound suspect when he says that. Now that you mentioned that, and it's true that the prophets, nobody goes back to it. It's I don't know what idea is trying to be conveyed through that emphasis on Genesis 3. But anyway, so that's an interesting one. Now you want to go back to number 3, then, Vero?
Yes. When you talk about the order, I was thinking about the waters, from the waters, then God filling the land, and then filling the waters, and it's all in order. So I agree. And well, I'm gonna ask
I've
the
dealt with
question. Yeah.
I've given a lot more information of that. I have a new book called New Explorations in the Lost World of Genesis. I don't know if it's been translated into Spanish yet, but it's probably getting there.
Okay,
But
Mm.
hopefully.
the New Explorations in the Lost World of Genesis. There I
Hmm.
spend a lot more time on some of these issues. I talk about order, the order spectrum a little bit more. I talk more about the serpent. I have about 60 FAQs, frequently asked questions,
Mm.
that I try to answer. So that's also a book that any of your audience who manages English might find that helpful.
Okay, okay.
Okay.
Go ahead, Bill.
Okay. So I'm going to ask about Genesis 6. From the perspective of the Asian Near Eastern cultural background, how should we understand the term sons of God?
So I've published on that section, Genesis 6, 1 through 4, probably half a dozen times, and my views have been in flux. I've changed my opinions over the years. Um, Most recently, I did a book with my son called Demons and Spirits in Biblical Theology, and there we've got a whole large section on that. Um, I originally, when I first published on it back in the late 80s, probably, I thought about it in terms of royalty, that these were the kings who styled themselves as sons of the deity. And so, in that sense, they could be referred to as the sons of God because that's how they presented themselves. And so, oh yeah, there it is.
That's the
New
book.
explorations in the lost
Okay,
world.
and it's on audio, so I'm gonna download it because I get some free
Yeah,
audio because I have Audible. So there you
good,
go. All right,
good.
just wanted to show you that.
Um, and but as time has gone on, I've kind of thought through it some more. Always the drawback with the royalty one is that in other places in the Old Testament where it uses sons of God, it's referring to members of the heavenly court, and so that was always a drawback. And so the way I think about it now, I've also become more aware of the Babylonian tradition, which is talks about the Apkallu. The
Mm,
Apkallu are beings, once the gods kind of became more separated from humankind, the gods still wanted to bring order, so they had to teach the arts of civilization to humankind so they could carry out order. And the Apkallu were messengers sent from the gods to instruct people in how to bring about order. They were considered wise sages. They consulted with kings. They were considered the sons of the gods, and so they were presented in that way. And they were sent to enhance humanity's ability to bring order. But in the end, they became corrupted and they married human women. Okay, there
Mhm.
you see the connection. So the idea that the biblical sons of God text in Genesis 6 is in some ways parallel or reflecting a knowledge of this Apkallu tradition is kind of the way I lean now. One of the
mm,
strongest supports of that is that our earliest extra biblical interpretation of Genesis comes from the book of Enoch. Third century, the book of the Watchers, the first part of the book of
Mhm.
Enoch. And that's the earliest view we have of the interpretation of these early chapters of Genesis in Jewish circles. Now it's already Hellenistic, so it's third century. But what they do, they have there's chapters and chapters about Genesis 6, 1 through 4. They call them the Watchers. These are the sons of God, and they elaborate this whole story. It's clear that the book of Enoch is talking about Genesis 6 and interpreting it. It is interpretation. It's not authoritative text, but they're interpreting it. But also, it's very clear that the book of Enoch is tapping into the Apkallu tradition and that the Apkallu are also the Watchers. So here we see in our earliest shot of Jewish interpretation of Genesis, they have connected Genesis 6 and the Apkallu tradition. I think that's a good reason to consider um, its explanatory power.
Mhm. Yes, I don't remember, you remember the late Michael Heiser. He when he introduced this thought into through his book, The Unseen Realm, it really created a big. Still, a lot of people just talk about it in their channels. That's all they can talk about the divine counsel. And at the beginning, I also liked it, but then again, that's one approach, not the approach to read the Old Testament.
Well, you know, Mike Kaiser was a friend of mine.
Mm,
We agreed that the ancient Near Eastern background was important.
mhm,
We agreed that we need to really study the text and its words carefully. We had a lot we agreed on.
mm,
We both agreed on the importance of the divine counsel in the ancient world. But then we go different directions
mm,
because he feels that the divine counsel is actually good theology and accurate description. And I feel that divine counsel is God's accommodation to Israelite cultural thinking. And
mm,
so I don't build any kind of concept of spiritual warfare out of the divine counsel.
mm.
So lots of what he does with the divine counsel are not things that I would agree with. But it just
Mhm.
shows there are different ways to do these things.
Yes, I have my teacher from Ridley who taught me Greek, Andrew Malone. He did his PhD on Old Testament theophanies, and he also says yes, it sounds interesting, in what Heiser suggested builds on the conversation, but it does not have to become the guiding light in order to understand that sort of thing. But it helps a lot. It does help. Then you want to go on to number 5, then Vero.
Yes. On Elijah's sacrifice in 1 Kings 18, in the account on Mount Carmel, Elijah offers a sacrifice outside the temple in Jerusalem. From a historical and theological perspective, how should we understand this action? Is an allowance exception, for example?
Yes, I'll do this one quickly because I really do want to get to question 6 as
Oh,
well.
okay, that's good.
And this one I think is pretty straightforward. He's offering a burnt offering, and burnt offerings could theoretically be offered in any number of locations
Mm,
because they're not dealing with the purifying of the temple. They're dealing with the idea that you are preparing to make a request to God. And so you're making a sacrifice in order to be able to make this request. And of course, that's what Elijah was doing. He was making a request that God would send rain, and so I don't think it's a problem at all. It's the kind of sacrifice that could be done elsewhere.
so sin
Okay.
offerings are the ones that are like essential to do it at the temple because of cleansing, and
Right,
not this one there.
right. So sin offering and guilt offering were done in
Mm,
order to cleanse the temple from the offenses, the desecration that had taken place. So
mm.
they had to be done in the temple, but the burnt offering is a different thing.
Okay, well.
Burnt offerings were done in the temple too,
Mm,
because requests were made of God there as well.
mhm.
But burnt offerings are prelude to requests. And so that could be other places.
Okay. Number 6
Okay,
then.
so the question number 6. On order in Genesis 1, in your approach, Genesis 1 is not primarily about material origins, but about the assignment of functions. How does our reading of the text change when we understand creation as ordering rather than manufacturing? And what implications does this have for the conversation between science and faith today?
This is a long one.
Good. So we've already been able to set this up a bit because I've
Mm,
already talked about the order spectrum.
Yes.
Order spectrum is the three parts: non order, order, and disorder. Non order is the default, like when you move into a new place and you've just got all the boxes everywhere and all the furniture piled in the corner. That's non order. It's not evil, it's just not ordered yet. Order has to be accomplished in the midst of non order, and that's done in an active process and it must be maintained actively. And then disorder is when someone disrupts. So if someone comes into your apartment and trashes it, okay, that's disorder. So we have three aspects. Order is arguably, and in my opinion, the most important value in the ancient world. that makes sense of why they would say a creation account needs to deal with order. Human roles needs to deal with order. Kingship, covenant, all deal with order. Wisdom is the pathway to order. Order is the highest value in the ancient world. And so it makes sense that a creation account would focus on that. So that represents a different set of values. We value order as well, but we don't necessarily turn it into a creation story, as I think that they did. And for them, that was the most important role of God as creator. He's the one that set things up to work the way they do. He's the one that makes our world to be what it is, not just materially. That opens up a whole new aspect of theology because it shows this aspect that God is the order bringer. When God brings justice, justice is part of order bringing. When he ordains kingship, kingship is part of order bringing. When God gives them Torah, Torah tells them how to maintain order in relationship to him. We can see that it all hangs together all over the place. So that's a distinct theology instead of, oh yeah, God made stuff. Okay, yeah, he did. But even when you read Colossians, right, about Christ as the creator, all things visible and invisible. But then what does it go on to name? Authorities and powers and principalities. And, this is how things work. Okay, all coheres, it all holds together. That's order. So Colossians does this as well. And that's, again, how we understand the image of God. That fits the image of God into Genesis 1 because we are order bringers. And then that fits with Genesis 3 because we decide to be our own order bringers. All of that is a disconnect if you only think of creation in terms of making material objects. Seeing it as order pulls the whole thing together. So I think that's why that's important. That's how it helps us to think differently about these texts. Now, of course, that has great significance for the science and faith conversation because the problems, the supposed conflict between science and the Bible is the claim or the thought that somehow the Bible is giving material origins for the universe and for people. That is, they've only looked in their own backpack. And in their backpack, it's all material. And so they think that Genesis 1 must be a material story. And then they feel like the material origins story is different from the science origins story. Okay, but they're really not telling the same story. Once you understand that the Bible is not a material origins story, then the conflict with science goes away. Because the Bible is not talking about the age of the earth. The Bible is not talking about the biological origins of humanity. Science is not in their backpack, nowhere. Okay, they're talking about other things. So when I think about if you were applying for a job, okay, at a company, and if someone else were applying for the same job, right, you would feel in competition. Now, the company's got to make a choice. It's either you or that other person. Okay. And so you're competing and sort of in conflict as you think about that job. Okay. But what if you're talking about you're applying for a job in the company in the marketing department, and somebody else is applying for a job in the company in the sales department? You're not competing with them. They're applying for a different job in a different part of the company. Now, there's a continuity because you're both applying for jobs in the same company, but you're not competing with each other because you're applying for different jobs. Okay, that's how it is with science and the Bible. Okay, they're different jobs in the same company. The company here is reality. Both our faith, our theology, Bible give a perspective on reality. It's a perspective that we believe is true, and we adopt it and accept it. Science is also giving a perspective on reality. but it's in a different department. They're not going for the same job as us. Okay, they're looking at a different position, but both are positions within that same company, dealing with trying to understand reality. When we look at a map of some, like if I look at a map of the United States that shows me the geology, I mean, all the different rock types that are there, that gives me certain perspective on the reality of our country. I can look at another map of our country that's rainfall. That gives me a perspective on my country. Same reality, same country. Those maps are not competing.
Mm.
You don't have to pick one or the other. They're both true, and it's
Yes.
fine. Okay? So this idea that they give us different perspectives on the same reality and that they can be complementary and compatible is what we get out of all of that. So this has incredibly important implications for the science and faith conversation because it helps us to see that they're not in competition. They're not trying to go for the same job. Does that make sense?
Yes, and also
Yes.
like to point out that the Genesis 1 is not the only creation account we find in the Bible. We also see Genesis, Psalm 8, and another Psalm, I think 74, if I'm not wrong. Also, some Job also talks about the creation.
And again, these are all perspectives
Yes.
about creation because you can talk about creation from any number of different views. One of the illustrations that I use in my new explorations book is, if you go to a play and you get there late and you miss the whole first act, when intermission comes up, you ask the people around you, how did the play begin? And one might talk about the script. Play began when you wrote the script. Somebody else might talk about the set, the construction of the set. That's really when the play began, when the set was constructed. Or somebody else might say the choosing the cast. That's when the play began. And you turn to them and say, no, just tell me what happened since the curtain opened, right? So those are all answers that are legitimate. You could say that each one of them reflects kind of a perspective on how the play began. But you've got a particular question in mind.
Mm.
Okay? So when the Israelites say, how did the world begin? Okay, they might answer it one way in Genesis. They might talk about a different perspective in Job or a different perspective in Psalms. And the ancient Near East might answer it in similar ways, that is, talking about order, but from their own theological perspective. And we answer it from our scientific material perspective. They're all answers that can be correct, but they offer different perspectives.
Yes, somebody, and if we take, we could take the route that we could say that maybe somehow Genesis 8, I think Psalm 8 was written before even, or compiled before Genesis 1 later on. All these things can come into play as well, John?
Yeah, we don't know when Genesis was compiled. Again, traditionally they tried to connect it to Moses, but there's no claim of that in Genesis or in the rest of the Bible. It eventually was included with the other books of the Pentateuch, but really authorship is a very different thing in the ancient world. They don't even think about authors. They think about authority figures. And traditions were generally passed down orally for many generations before anybody compiled them and wrote them down. So I wrote about that in a book called The Lost World of Scripture.
Oh, wow, okay.
And that whole process. So we don't know when Genesis was written, and again, the fact that the rest of the Old Testament barely mentions the first 11 chapters of Genesis suggests to some people that maybe Genesis kind of came toward the end of the Old Testament period, but we don't know, and it doesn't really matter because we're not trying to prove any points from that.
There you go. The last word of scripture, ancient
And
literature
I believe
culture.
that one's translated into Spanish as well.
Okay, I'll have a look.
I'm not sure.
I haven't checked it up.
I know some of the
2013, most
Lost
likely.
World.
Yes, most likely. So by the way, just to finish this this last question, then what you just said is very explosive. A lot of people get afraid So how do we take Jesus' words, that the book of Moses, then just to finish up maybe the whole interview, but because what you just said is very explosive in people's minds, because then we put into doubt in their minds Jesus' words or Jesus' thinking of the Old Testament.
He doesn't call Genesis the book of Moses. He doesn't refer to Genesis as written by Moses. He talks about a canonical category, the law of Moses, which by his time in Jewish circles is the way you describe the first 5 books. So he's referring to the literary perceptions of his time, just like Jesus in his humanity has a backpack.
Yes.
He's discussing things in his world, in his world of thought, in his conversations. He's talking to Pharisees and scribes, and he's working in a context. And so he refers to the literature in ways that they would understand. He's not trying to make authorship claims.
He's not trying to, like he said to Nicodemus, if I talk to you heavenly things you don't understand. Or yes. So Vero, your last question or comment?
Yes, I don't know if this question applies, but I want to ask you about the image of God in humanity. And well, in this commentary, it says something about manifestation, but I have a problem with that. You know why? Because of the Trinitarian view. I'm Trinitarian, but I want to ask that because I have that question.
So this is about the use of the plurals when it talks about the image of God. Let us make man in our image. Is that what you're talking about? Okay.
Yes, how the people understood that before.
So of course, Israelites know nothing of the Trinity. They do not have a Trinitarian doctrine. And if we're going to try to track with the authors and understand what they meant, we can't read Trinity into that. So how would have they thought about it? They probably would have thought about it in terms of divine counsel. That is, that God is talking to the council. I think that the strongest proof of that is actually in Isaiah chapter 6, when that is a scene of the divine council. Isaiah is intruded on the meeting of the divine council, and there Yahweh saying, "Who shall we send? Who will go for us?" Right? That's on behalf of the council. And so that use of divine plurals would reflect the council setting. So that's how I would read it. I think that's how an Israelite would have understood it.
Yes, and it's you also find that in either Second Kings, I forgot, Chronicles, where God is with his council and they're deciding what to do with Ahab.
Yeah. 1 Kings 22.
First
The
Kings
Micaiah's vision of the divine council. Of course, we have the divine council in Job 1 and 2. Okay, so
yes,
it's clear that they think in those terms.
So and that's very interesting, because God asking his creation what to do. That's amazing.
Well, we see it also at a different level in Genesis 18 with his conversation with Abraham. On the way, should I share with Abraham what I'm going to do? And he talks about destroying Sodom and Gomorrah, and they have a conversation. Cool.
Because there's a view that God is so sovereign that he doesn't need anything, but he gives us a mind, he gives us intelligence, and he doesn't want to consult to us. What's the point?
And it's not because he needs to, it's because he decides that it's important in some way to do so.
All right. Well, I think this is 1 hour now, so thank you very much, John. I hope to have you again. I'm gonna get one of the other books, and if you don't mind, maybe in the future we can do another
sure
interview.
I do these things all the time, so very happy to.
And this time will be a good time too.
Yes.
Okay. Well, it will be great then. And if you can stay just 1 minute more after we close, sure. Just to ask you how you felt about the interview. Vero, your last words.
I'm glad you have been here. Well, I had many questions. Well, your answers were very good, really.
Well, and I hope that our audience will be able to enjoy this interview, and also to be able to go and buy this big book. Esta Biblia, Biblia de Estudio Transfondo, espero que les haya gustado la entrevista y que vayan a comprar este libro. Este libro les va a ayudar, es uno de los mejores. Para mí ahorita es la mejor Biblia para leer si usted quiere conocer qué es lo que hay detrás de la escritura. Así que muchas gracias, que Dios les bendiga. No se olviden de dar un like, de comentar, de suscribirse al canal de Vero, las notas de Vero y el canal de Luis Jovel también. Y también a seguir a John Walton. I'm just saying that they should follow you on social media. Is there any way you have a page?
No, I'm not
No.
on social media.
Oh,
Well, but you have a lot of books. So I'm going to say
Yes.
that they should buy your books. Y abajo voy a dejar una lista de libros de John Walton que ustedes pueden comprar en español para que ustedes puedan ver el trabajo del doctor Walton en español y así poder ser bendecidos a través de lo que él dice. Así que like, suscríbase, comente, vea las notas de este video donde le va a dar más información acerca de mí y también anótese a las notas de Vero para que así usted pueda apoyarnos de ese modo. Y como le acabo de decir a John Walton, próximamente quizás él está dispuesto a regresar a hablar de otro libro en español de él. Si terminas el video entonces, Vero, te lo agradecería mucho. Que Dios les bendiga y hasta
bendiciones.
la próxima.